The church was heavy with lilies, their perfume fighting a losing battle against the scent of candle wax and sorrow. The pews overflowed with black, hats, veils, dark suits pressed and stiff, as if grief itself had been tailored and starched for the occasion. At the center of it all sat Clara Whitmore, the young widow. She was every inch the image of mourning, draped in black lace, her porcelain skin nearly translucent against the fabric. Her hands, delicate but unsteady, clutched a handkerchief embroidered with her late husband's initials. Every so often she dabbed her eyes, though no tears actually fell. And the whispers began. So sudden a man like Richard? Heart attack. They said he was fine just last week. Funny, isn't it? How the widow looks more restless than broken. The rumors slithered through the church pews like smoke. Richard Whitmore had been larger than life. Real estate tycoon, benefactor of half the city, a man whose name was stamped on buildings and billboards. Men like him weren't supposed to die in their sleep. The widow lifted her chin slightly, as if she could feel the speculation clawing at her back. Her eyes, red at the edges but dry, swept the room and landed, just briefly, on the figure standing near the side aisle. Anthony Gregg. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark skin set in striking contrast to the sea of pale, grieving faces. He didn't belong here, not in this cathedral of old money and whispered privilege, but he stood with a quiet confidence that made people look twice. His suit was sharp, but not expensive. His gaze? Locked on Clara with a steadiness that betrayed far more than condolences. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone leaned to their neighbor. Isn't that the dance instructor? The one from that downtown studio with the rumors? What the hell is he doing here? Clara felt the heat of their stares, the judgment pooling like storm clouds around her. Still, her eyes lingered on Anthony a moment longer than was safe. His expression was unreadable, a mask of respect, yet behind it burned something more, something dangerous. The service droned on, the priest speaking of eternal rest and divine mysteries, but no one seemed to hear him. All eyes were on the widow and the stranger. When the final hymn ended and the casket was rolled down the aisle, Clara rose. Her body swayed slightly, as though she might faint, but she pressed forward. Behind her, Mrs. Whitmore Sr., a sharp-faced woman with ice in her veins, glared daggers at her daughter-in-law. Outside, the sky had turned gray, clouds heavy with rain. Guests clustered in groups, exchanging condolences in tones that were anything but sincere. Clara accepted their words with robotic nods, her lips painted into the faintest smile of gratitude. But her eyes? They kept searching the crowd. And then she saw him. Anthony stood apart, leaning against the stone wall of the church, his posture casual, his gaze fixed on her like an anchor in a storm. She waited until the crowd thinned, until Mrs. Whitmore Sr. was swept away by her entourage, until the well-wishers drifted to their cars. Then, like a shadow breaking free from the light, Clara slipped away from the group and circled the side of the church. Her heels clicked against the wet stone path. She turned a corner, heart pounding, not from grief, but from anticipation. And there he was, waiting. "Clara," Anthony said, his voice low, rough with something between restraint and hunger. She drew a shaky breath. Up close, he was even more dangerous than at a distance. The way his eyes lingered on her, as though peeling back the widow's costume to reveal the woman beneath. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, though the way her fingers trembled as they reached for him betrayed her words. "I had to," he replied. "You buried him, but you looked like you were the one trapped in the coffin." Her lips parted, a sharp exhale escaping. For a moment she let herself lean against the stone wall, closing her eyes. The weight of grief, guilt, and longing pressed down all at once. "They're watching me," she said, almost choking on the words. "They already suspect. Let them," Anthony answered, stepping closer. "They don't know a damn thing, and they never will." For a beat, silence hung between them, charged and dangerous. The drizzle began, raindrops streaking her veil. Clara reached out, her fingers brushing his hand, lightning quick, as if even the air might gossip if she lingered too long. And then she pulled away, breathless. "We can't be seen." "Not yet," she said. "Not here." Antony's eyes darkened, but he nodded. "Then tell me when." Her gaze lifted to his, a flicker of something defiant crossing her face. "Soon," she whispered. "Soon." And with that, Clara turned, gathering her skirts, walking back toward the mourners. To them, she was still the grieving widow. But inside, a storm raged, one that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with a man waiting in the shadows. The casket was in the ground. But the real story, Clara knew, was only just beginning. Clara Whitmore had once imagined marriage as freedom, a ticket out of the small-town shadows she'd been born into. Richard Whitmore had swept her off her feet with the kind of confidence only men with too much money could afford. He was older, polished, and powerful. When he placed a diamond the size of her knuckle on her finger, she believed she had finally stepped into a fairy tale. But fairy tales can feel like cages when the prince turns out to be a warden. Richard's mansion was sprawling. Marble floors, gilded chandeliers, walls lined with priceless art. Yet for Clara, it was nothing more than a velvet prison. She was dressed in silk gowns and diamonds. Yes, but her movements were watched, her friendships cut short, her voice often drowned out by Richard's booming certainty. "You don't need friends, Clara. You have me," he would say, pressing another jewel into her hand as if gems could replace affection. "Why do you need to go out?" he'd ask when she mentioned wanting to see Elaine, her childhood best friend. "We have everything right here." Even the silk sheets on her bed felt like chainsome nights. Elaine still came by, but Richard's disapproval was always thick in the air. One evening, sipping wine in the Whitmore parlor, Elaine leaned close and whispered, "You don't look happy. You look caged." Clara laughed it off, but the words stung because they were true. It was in that gilded cage that Antony Gregg appeared. At first, innocently enough, Richard had insisted Clara take some lessons, stay fit. The city socialites were buzzing about a new downtown dance studio, and Richard, proud of his trophy wife, wanted her to shine. That's where Clara met him. Antony wasn't like the men in her world. He was bold, his confidence not purchased but earned. He had a laugh that shook the room, eyes that dared her to remember she was alive. In their first lesson, when his hand rested lightly on her back, Clara felt heat surge through her body in a way no diamond necklace had ever sparked. The affair began in whispers. Text messages sent at midnight under silk sheets. Quick glances during lessons that lingered too long. The first kiss happened in the shadow of a downtown alley. Clara pressed against the brick wall, Antony's lips tasting of danger. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked, breathless. "No," she whispered, "but I know what I want." From there, escalated. Hotel rooms rented under false names. Dinners where her laughter came freely for the first time in years. Clara began to live a double life. The perfect wife at Richard's arm in public, the passionate lover tangled in Antony's arms in private. But secrets rot faster than silk. Pastor Hale had been Richard's confidant for decades, but he wasn't blind. He saw Clara's sudden absences, her distracted eyes during Sunday service, her new glow that had nothing to do with scripture. One afternoon, he stopped her outside the church, his voice gentle but edged with warning. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "a heart can't serve two masters. You risk breaking more than vows if you keep down this road." Clara forced a polite smile, but inside, her pulse thundered. And then there was Mr. Gaines, Richard's lawyer, who hovered like a vulture circling its prey. He was slick, calculating, and always 2 steps ahead. Richard trusted him implicitly, but Gaines's sharp eyes didn't miss the cracks in Clara's composure. He filed them away, like notes for a performance that hadn't yet reached its climax. Elaine grew uneasy, too. Clara confessed little, but friendship doesn't need words. Elaine saw the changes. The secretive smiles, the missed calls, the sudden bursts of joy followed by shadows of fear. One night, over champagne, Elaine blurted out, "If you're playing with fire, Clara, you're going to get burned. And I can't watch you go up in flames." Clara squeezed her hand, but said nothing. The question lingered over them all like storm clouds. Richard's death had been labeled sudden, unexpected, tragic. But was it truly an accident? Or had Clara's gilded cage been unlocked in the most dangerous way possible? As Clara slipped between silk sheets that night, her phone buzzing with another midnight message from Antony, she couldn't shake the thought. Richard had always said, "Everything I built will be yours one day." Perhaps that day had come sooner than expected, and perhaps it hadn't been fate. The Whitmore mansion was a museum of wealth. Marble floors polished to a mirror, chandeliers dripping with crystal, a grand staircase that swept upward like a royal stage. Yet in the quiet hours of night, that wealth felt like a tomb. Clara stood in Richard's study, her hand trembling as she lined up his prescription bottles. The labels glared at her in neat, clinical print. Dosages, refills, doctor's name. But when she picked up the bottle he'd taken from that night, her stomach turned. The pills inside weren't the ones prescribed. She remembered, too vividly, the sound of them rattling in her hand, the whisper of Antony behind her. "It's the only way we can be free." Richard had collapsed hours later, clutching his chest, his body sprawling across the Persian rug like a broken marionette. The paramedics had said heart attack. The doctors had nodded gravely. But Clara knew better. Freedom had come at the price of a handful of pills. She swallowed hard, shutting the cabinet with a snap, as though closing it might erase the memory. The whispers of foul play were already circling. Mrs. Whitmore Sr. was relentless, prowling the mansion with questions disguised as condolences. One afternoon, she cornered Clara in the drawing room, her pearl necklace glinting like a weapon. Richard was strong as an ox, the older woman said, her voice sharp. Men like him don't just fall down dead. Not without help. Clara forced a hollow smile. Grief makes us all look for reasons. Mrs. Whitmore leaned closer, her eyes hard as steel. And sometimes, grief uncovers the truth. Clara held her composure, but inside, panic spread like wildfire. That night, the panic almost betrayed her. She had slipped into her silk coat, intent on meeting Antony at their usual hotel, when Elaine appeared at the door, unannounced. "Clara." Elaine's voice was soft, puzzled, as her eyes fell on Clara's evening dress, the carefully painted lips, the perfume heavy in the air. I was just going for a drive," Clara stammered, tugging her coat tighter. Elaine's gaze lingered, skeptical but unsaid. At midnight, Clara's heart pounded. One more question, one more push, and Elaine might have followed her, might have discovered everything. Instead, Elaine sighed, gave a weary smile, and let it go. "Be careful," she murmured, stepping back into the shadows. Clara exhaled a shaky breath, slipping out the door before her courage could collapse. At the hotel, Antony was waiting, sprawled in an armchair like a king who had conquered the world. The city lights glowed through the window, reflecting in his sharp eyes. "You're late," he said, rising to kiss her, his hands gripping her waist with a hunger that made her melt and tremble all at once. "I almost got caught," Clara whispered against his chest. Elaine was at the house. "Elaine, doesn't matter." His tone was dismissive, confident. "She won't say a word. And even if she does, who will believe her?" Clara pulled back, her voice cracking. "Antony, what if they start digging? His mother already suspects." He cut her off, pressing a finger to her lips. "Listen to me. He's gone. That life is gone. Now it's our turn to live." His words were intoxicating, dangerous, irresistible. Clara let them wash over her like gospel. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that freedom was worth the risk, that they could outrun suspicion, that passion could drown out guilt. But in the quiet spaces between his kisses, doubt whispered. Days later, Clara stood by the grand piano, watching as Mrs. Whitmore Sr. stalked through the mansion with a hired investigator at her side. The man's eyes scanned everything, bottles, drawers, papers, as though every corner of the house hid secret. Clara's skin prickled with every step he took. From the doorway, Mr. Gaines appeared, his slick smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he drawled, "perhaps you'd like to leave these matters to the professionals. The estate is complicated enough without speculation." But Clara saw the way his gaze lingered on her, sharp and knowing, as if he already held the winning card in a game she didn't know she was playing. That night, Clara found herself once more in Antony's arms, her fears unraveling in the heat of his touch. But as dawn crept into the hotel room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by one truth she couldn't ignore. Richard's death had freed her, but it had also chained her to a secret that could destroy them both. And secrets, Clara knew, never stayed buried forever. The mahogany-paneled conference room smelled faintly of leather and old money. Heavy curtains shut out the morning sun, casting everything in a muted glow. Around the long polished table, Richard Whitmore's legacy was about to be divided, piece by piece, word by word. Clara sat at the head of the table, wrapped in a black silk dress, the very picture of a grieving widow. Her eyes, framed by dark lashes, shimmered with a practiced fragility. She clasped a lace handkerchief in her hands, though her pulse was a drumbeat of anticipation. Mr. Gaines, Richard's longtime attorney, slid into his chair like a serpent, his pinstripe suit gleaming under the dim lights. He tapped a folder in front of him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice oily smooth, "we are here to execute the final wishes of the late Richard Whitmore." Antony wasn't in the room. Clara had insisted on that, but she could almost feel him. His presence clung to her like heat under her skin, reminding her why she had risked everything. The reading began. Stocks, trusts, property, an avalanche of wealth that now had one name written on it, Clara Whitmore. At the sound of it, a sharp intake of breath filled the room. Elaine, sitting 2 seats down, reached for Clara's arm under the table, squeezing gently. Clara kept her face steady, but inside, adrenaline rushed through her veins. And then came the twist. "However," Mr. Gaines drawled, drawing out the word as if savoring it, "there is a stipulation. Should Mrs. Whitmore remarry within the next 2 years, the estate will undergo redistribution. A portion will revert to the Whitmore family trust." A bomb detonated. Murmurs, gasps, shifting bodies. Clara's chest tightened. She forced her lips into a delicate curve, as though the clause were a mere formality. But inside, dread flickered. Richard, even in death, still had his chains on her. When the meeting adjourned, Mr. Gaines leaned closer, his cologne sharp, his smile sharper. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, "there are ways to ensure stability. Paperwork can be managed. Documents adjusted. For fee, of course." His eyes trailed deliberately over her, a mixture of greed and something darker. Clara's throat went dry. This was not a man offering help. It was a man taking measure of her desperation. Back at the mansion, Clara barely had time to unbutton her coat before the front doors thundered open. "Clara!" Mrs. Whitmore Sr. stormed in, her cane striking the marble floor like a judge's gavel. Her silver hair was pinned tightly, her eyes ablaze with fury. "You think you fooled everyone with your tears and black dresses?" She spat, her voice echoing in the grand hallway. "But I see through you. My son didn't die from a weak heart. He died because of you." Clara's composure cracked. "That's absurd," she hissed, clutching the banister for steadiness. The older woman's voice rose, shrill, almost hysterical. "I will drag your name through every church, every club, every courtroom in this city until they see you for what you are, a murderer. If it's the last thing I do, I'll expose you." For a moment, silence. Only the ticking grandfather clock punctuated the air. Elaine appeared from the parlor, trying to intervene, but Mrs. Whitmore Sr. shoved past her and stormed out, her words still hanging in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Clara stood frozen, trembling, her nails biting in her palm. That night, upstairs in her bedroom suite, the mood was entirely different. Crystal glasses clinked. Champagne bubbled. Antony leaned back against the velvet headboard, shirt unbuttoned, his grin wolfish. Clara, barefoot in her slip, crawled onto the bed beside him. "She thinks she can scare me," Clara muttered, tilting the glass back, foam spilling onto her lips. Antony brushed it away with his thumb, his touch lingering. "Let her bark. Dogs don't bite when they're too busy growling." Clara laughed, a low, shaky sound, the release of days of tension. She leaned into him, their bodies pressed close. The will, the threats, the accusations, all melted away under the glow of desire and the intoxicating taste of power. "We have everything now," Antony whispered against her ear. "The money, the freedom, the life we wanted. No one could touch us." Clara closed her eyes, letting herself believe it, even as a shadow of Richard's cold stare seemed to linger in the corners of the room. And with another toast, lust and greed became inseparable, binding them tighter than any vow could. The mansion, once heavy with grief, now pulsed with music, laughter, and the unmistakable aroma of excess. Crystal glasses clinked nightly in the Whitmore estate, echoing down marble corridors like a toast to betrayal. Clara had stepped fully into her new role, the grieving widow turned wealthy heiress. But the silk gowns and champagne flutes couldn't muffle the ghosts that followed her to bed. By day, she and Antony lived like a headline no one could print. Hidden vacations in the Caribbean, dinners at candlelit rooftops where the city sprawled like a conquered empire below them. Money moved with ease, almost recklessly. New cars, rare wines, jewelry that sparkled a little too brightly under the spotlight. But Clara couldn't silence the shadows. At night, she dreamt of Richard clutching his chest, eyes wide and desperate, his voice straining as he gasped her name. She'd wake trembling, drenched in sweat, staring at the empty space beside her bed. Sometimes she swore she could still hear the rattling of the pill bottle in her hand, the whisper of Antony urging her, "It's the only way we can be free." Antony, however, seemed untouched by such hauntings. He thrived. The money emboldened him. He walked taller, dressed sharper, and spoke with a confidence that teetered dangerously on arrogance. At first, he insisted on discretion, private meetings, hidden rendezvous. But now, he flaunted their affair, touching Clara too casually in public, smirking at staff who looked away too slowly. One evening, at a dimly lit restaurant tucked away in a quiet part of town, Clara snapped. "Do you have to be so obvious?" She hissed across the table, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. Antony leaned back, grinning, the flicker of candlelight making him look both alluring and sinister. "We're rich, Clara. No one questions the rich. They envy them." His words sent a chill through her. It wasn't envy she feared, it was exposure. Meanwhile, Elaine carried her own silent torment. The housekeeper had witnessed more than she wanted. She'd seen Clara slip into Richard's study the night he collapsed. She'd overheard whispers between Clara and Antony, words too vague to accuse, but too damning to forget. Now detectives had begun circling quietly, their questions smooth but prying. Did Mr. Whitmore have enemies? Did you ever notice changes in his health? Was Mrs. Whitmore under stress? Elaine folded laundry with trembling hands, her conscience split between loyalty to the household that paid her and the truth clawing at her insides. Every time she saw Clara glide down the stairs in diamonds, Elaine felt the weight of silence pressing heavier. It wasn't just detectives watching. Pastor Hale, an old family confidant, had grown uneasy. He found Clara one Sunday after service, standing at the edge of the pews, her veil pulled low. His voice dropped to a near whisper as he touched her arm. "God's not mocked, child," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Whatever has been sown in darkness will come to light. This will end badly." Clara's throat tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice breaking. But the pastor only gave her a look, a mixture of pity and warning, that lingered long after she left the church. Still, the nights returned to excess. One evening, Antony threw open the doors to the mansion's balcony, the city lights blazing like jewels beneath them. He poured champagne into 2 flutes, his movements theatrical, almost mocking the very life they now lived. "To us," he declared, raising his glass high. Clara lifted hers reluctantly, the bubbles fizzing like guilt in her chest. "To us," she echoed. But as their glasses clinked, her eyes drifted to the shadows along the garden path. For the briefest second, she thought she saw Richard, watching, waiting. Her hand trembled, champagne spilling down her wrist like liquid gold. "Relax," Anthony said, pulling her close. "We won. Stop acting like you're still fighting." But Clara knew better. The fight was only beginning. Because shadows don't stay buried. They grow, stretching long and sharp across even the brightest champagne nights. The gala glittered under crystal chandeliers, every surface shimmering with wealth. Strings hummed softly in the background, the air thick with perfume, champagne bubbles, and whispered gossip. Clara floated through it all draped in emerald silk, a picture of grace and power. Yet beneath her diamonds, her nerves rattled like loose glass in a storm. She had perfected the smile everyone expected, the grieving widow who carried her loss with elegance. But tonight, every pair of eyes seemed sharper, every laugh heavier, every glass of champagne tasting a little too bitter. And then she saw her. Mrs. Whitmore Sr. stood near the ballroom's entrance, regal in a black gown that swallowed the light around her. Her pearl necklace rested on her chest like a crown jewel-turned weapon, her eyes locked on Clara with a venomous steadiness. She didn't move immediately. She let the tension stretch, drawing Clara's anxiety like a bowstring. Finally, she glided forward, cutting through the crowd like a blade through silk. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to run, but instead she planted her heels into the marble floor, refusing to show weakness. "Clara." Mrs. Whitmore Sr.'s voice was smooth, almost kind, too kind. She leaned close, her perfume sharp and suffocating. "Enjoy your champagne, darling. Because soon," her lips brushed Clara's ear, "you'll be drinking it from a prison cup." The glass trembled in Clara's hand, and she nearly spilled it. The old woman smiled, satisfied at the reaction, before retreating back into the crowd, her pearls gleaming like chains. The moment she was gone, Clara's composure cracked. She slipped out to the terrace, gulping the cool night air like a drowning woman. The music and laughter spilled faintly through the French doors, but here, under the stars, she finally let her mask fall. Anthony found her moments later, his tuxedo jacket slung carelessly over his shoulder, his charm still turned up like he was on stage. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, sliding in close. "She knows, Anthony," Clara hissed, eyes wide. "She knows something. She had this look. She said I'd be in prison. She's digging into us." Anthony smirked, sipping from his own glass like it was nothing. "Let her dig. She'll find dirt, sure, but dirt isn't proof. People whisper all the time, Clara. That doesn't mean they can touch us." "You don't understand," Clara pressed, clutching his arm. "She's not just whispering. She's hunting. She hired someone. A private investigator. I can feel it." Anthony shrugged, his arrogance flickering into annoyance. "And? Let her waste her money. Nobody can tie Richard's death to you. Unless you start cracking under pressure." Clara's face hardened. "You sound awfully calm for someone who could lose everything." "Maybe because it's not your fortune at stake. It's mine." His jaw tightened, and he pulled his arm away. "You think I'm only here for the money?" Clara's eyes searched his face. His grin, the one that had once made her feel alive, now seemed hollow, rehearsed. "Aren't you?" she whispered. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of violins drifting from inside. Finally, Anthony smirked again, but there was no warmth in it this time. "I'm here because we're in this together, Clara. Don't forget that." He leaned close, brushing his lips against hers. "If you go down, I go down too." It was meant to sound reassuring. Instead, it chilled her to the bone. Inside the gala, Mrs. Whitmore Sr. watched from across the ballroom, her investigator's file tucked neatly into her clutch. Phone records, financial transfers, prescription bottles with altered labels. Enough threads to weave a noose. She lifted her glass of champagne, eyes never leaving Clara on the terrace. "Tick-tock," she murmured to herself. "Tick-tock." Back on the terrace, Clara forced herself to smile again, though her insides twisted. She was standing next to the man who had awakened her hunger, her lust, her greed, and yet for the first time, she realized she didn't trust him. Her empire glittered around her, but for the first time, it felt fragile. One accusation, one headline, one slip of the tongue, and everything would come crashing down. She stared at Anthony, her hand tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. Was he her savior, or the very devil who would drag her into ruin? The night air was cool, but Clara felt the heat of hell pressing closer. The church bells tolled heavy and slow, each strike echoing like a warning. Inside St. Augustine's Cathedral, a sea of silk hats, pearls, and tailored suits filled the pews. The air was thick with perfume, gossip, and unease. The wedding of Clara Whitmore and Anthony Gregg should have been the society event of the year. Instead, it felt like a funeral draped in lace. At the altar, Pastor Hale dabbed at his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. He had performed countless weddings, but never one that felt so haunted. His eyes darted from the towering crucifix above him to Clara, radiant in white satin, her veil cascading like a waterfall of innocence. But her eyes betrayed her. Wide, restless, hunted. Beside her, Anthony stood with the swagger of a man who believed the world was finally his. His tuxedo gleamed, his cufflinks sparkled, and his grin was painted on like armor. To him, the whispers in the pews were nothing but background music. Let them talk, he told Clara earlier that morning, fastening her necklace with cool fingers. By the time this is over, they'll envy you. But the congregation was not envious. They were divided. Half sat stiffly in mourning black, still grieving Richard Whitmore's sudden death. The other half shifted uncomfortably, scandal written on their faces. And then there were the supporting players, each wound tighter than the church's pipe organ. Mr. Gaines, the family lawyer, sat smug in the front row. He leaned back in his pew, lips curled in satisfaction. The contracts had been signed, the estate secured, and his loyalty to Clara was already paying dividends. He smirked, as though daring anyone to challenge what had already been sealed in ink. Just behind him sat Elaine. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap the knuckles turned white. She avoided Clara's gaze, her mind racing with the secret she carried like a ticking bomb. If she opened her mouth, the entire sanctuary would erupt. And yet, silence kept her safe for now. But the storm broke when Mrs. Whitmore Sr. rose to her feet. The matriarch, draped in black lace like a vengeful widow, clutched her cane with iron fingers. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with fury. "I object." Her voice cut through the ceremony, sharp as shattered glass. Gasps rippled through the congregation. The music stopped. Even the candles seemed to flicker in shock. Pastor Hale froze, his Bible halfway open. "Mrs. Whitmore, please." She silenced him with a trembling hand, her voice rising, cracking with grief and rage. This woman, this serpent, murdered my son, and now she dares stand here, under God's house, to wed the man who helped her do it. All eyes turned to Clara, who staggered back as if struck. Her bouquet slipped from her hands, roses scattering across the altar steps like drops of blood. "Mother!" Clara's voice cracked, desperate. "You poisoned him." Mrs. Whitmore Sr. screamed, her cane thudding against the floor with each word. "You and that vulture beside you. Murderers!" The church exploded into chaos. Whispers turned to shouts. Some rose in protest, others in disbelief. A woman fainted in the back row. Clara's chest heaved, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, she looked at Anthony, searching for reassurance, for some thread of comfort. But Anthony only tightened his jaw, lips curling into a hard, defiant smile. "Sit down, old woman." He spat under his breath, his voice venomous. "You've lost. This is our day." The cruelty of it made Clara flinch. For the first time, she wondered, was he her savior or her executioner? Pastor Hale tried to regain order, his voice cracking. "Silence, please. Silence in the house of God." But the words barely carried over the storm. His forehead gleamed with sweat, his eyes darting helplessly to the crucifix above as if begging for divine intervention. And then silence. Heavy, suffocating. Mrs. Whitmore Sr. collapsed into her pew, her fury spent but her accusation lingering in the air like smoke. Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to run, to scream, to confess. But Antony's hand closed over hers, squeezing with a pressure that was both reassuring and threatening. He leaned in, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "Finish this, or we both go down." Her heart pounded in her ears. The congregation's eyes bored into her, some filled with pity, others with disgust. But the ceremony pressed on, like a play that could not be stopped mid-act. Pastor Hale, pale as parchment, forced the words from his lips. "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man?" Clara's lips quivered. "I do." "And do you, Antony Gregg, take this woman?" Antony grinned. "I do." The vows were spoken, each word landing like a stone in water. And when Pastor Hale, voice cracking, pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation did not cheer. They did not clap. They sat in horrified silence. Clara and Antony kissed beneath the crucifix, their lips locked in a seal of defiance. Above them, Christ on the cross seemed to look down in sorrow. The silence that followed was deafening. A marriage had been made, but so had a curse. The Whitmore estate should have felt like a palace of victory. The wedding rings still gleamed on Clara's finger, the diamond flashing under the chandelier light of their new bedroom. But instead of triumph, the house felt colder than the grave she had so carefully dug for her way into this family. From the first night, the cracks showed. Antony, once so attentive, didn't even stay in their marital suite. He disappeared after the reception with a glass of bourbon in hand, muttering about needing to clear his head. Clara sat on the edge of the silk-sheeted bed, veil still crumpled on the floor, realizing she hadn't just married into wealth. She had shackled herself to a man with darker appetites than she had bargained for. By the following week, the estate was buzzing with rumors. Antony threw parties on the terrace, hosting models and wannabe actresses, champagne spilling like water. Clara would walk down the staircase, silent, watching women laugh too loudly at his jokes. Her presence was ignored, as if the bride had already become irrelevant. One night, unable to contain herself, she cornered him in a marble-tiled bathroom while he shaved, the sound of the razor harsh in the silence. "Do you love me, Antony?" she demanded, her voice trembling but sharp. He looked up in the mirror, smirking with that infuriating calm. "I love what we've built," he said. "But love? That's for fairy tales." Her throat tightened. "So what am I to you?" He set the razor down and leaned close, his reflection towering over hers. "You're my wife, which means you don't question me. And if you ever think about walking away," he tapped the blade against the sink, letting the steel glint. "Remember, Clara, you have as much to lose as I do." The warning was clear: silence or destruction. Meanwhile, the walls outside their gilded cage were closing in. Elaine, pale and restless, sat across from two detectives at a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. Her hand shook as she stirred her coffee, her spoon clinking too loudly. I can't carry it anymore," she whispered, eyes darting. "The Whitmores think they're untouchable, but you don't know what Clara's capable of. She's not innocent. None of them are." The detectives exchanged glances, careful not to press too hard. Elaine didn't spill everything. Not yet. But she gave him enough. Phone calls, late-night drives, money that had passed through hands it shouldn't have. It was the first crack in Clara's carefully constructed alibi. And then came Mr. Gaines. Clara found him waiting in the Whitmore library one stormy afternoon, seated comfortably in her late husband's leather armchair, as if he owned the place. His cane rested across his lap, and his smile was the kind that belonged to men who never asked. They simply collected. "You thought I'd forget?" he asked smoothly, watching her stiffen at the door. "This little empire you've clawed your way into, it doesn't come cheap. My cut is overdue." Clara tried to feign control, straightening her shoulders. "I don't owe you anything." "Oh, but you do," he countered, sliding a folder across the polished desk. Inside were photographs, grainy, damning, and terrifyingly specific. Clara's late-night meetings, money envelopes, a prescription bottle with her fingerprints. Her breath caught. "If I go down," he said softly. I'm dragging you with me. So, pay me, or pray. And then, above them all, stood Mrs. Whitmore Sr., watching, plotting, sharpening her knife not of steel but of truth. Her sworn affidavit was thick with names, dates, and transactions. The private investigator's report was even thicker, every page a nail in Clara's coffin. She signed her name with a flourish, her eyes burning with righteous fury. She thinks she's won, she muttered to herself in her study, the storm rattling the windows outside. But the truth has teeth, and I'm going to let it bite. Clara, trapped in the center of this tightening web, sat alone in her bedroom that night. The house around her was alive with Antony's laughter, the clinking of glasses, the perfume of strangers who had no idea what sins had paved their way inside. She clutched her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger until her skin burned. She had thought marriage was her salvation. Instead, it was her prison, one built of gold, lined with betrayal and echoing with the footsteps of enemies who knew her secrets. And she knew, deep down, the walls wouldn't hold forever. The Whitmore estate was silent that night, too silent for a home that once thrummed with the sounds of Richard's booming laughter and Clara's careful footsteps. The chandeliers above flickered faintly, their golden light stretching long shadows across the marble floor. Clara had grown used to silence since her marriage to Antony, but not this kind. This silence fell off, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the storm about to break. She descended the staircase in her silk nightgown, barefoot, heart thudding as she replayed in her mind the suspicious smirk Antony had worn at dinner, the way he slid his phone under the table, the sudden tension in his jaw when she asked about the missing funds from the joint account. Curiosity became suspicion. Suspicion sharpened into dread. She moved like a thief in her own home, gliding toward his office, an office she had sworn never to enter. The door was ajar. Inside, the glow of his laptop screen painted Antony's face in cold blue. Clara froze, holding her breath, but he wasn't there. He'd left the screen open, perhaps careless in his arrogance. Clara crept forward. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the tabs left open. Wire transfers, offshore accounts. Tens of thousands moved, one transaction after another, all funneled into accounts in his name. Then she saw it. The messages. You'll have it all soon, baby. This money's just the beginning. She's too naive to see what's coming. Give me a little more time. Her chest tightened. The messages weren't to a banker. They were to a woman. Her husband wasn't just reckless. He was planning his escape. The floor creaked behind her. Clara whirled around. Antony stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his phone still in hand. For a long moment, the two stared at each other like predators in the same cage. You shouldn't be in here, he said at last, his voice low, dangerous. And you shouldn't be planning to leave me penniless, Clara shot back, her voice breaking. Is this your game, Antony? Take my money, whisper to other women, and laugh while I drown. He smirked, stepping closer, each stride heavy with menace. Don't play the victim. You knew what this was. Her breath caught. What this was? I married you. You married me because you wanted out. He roared suddenly, slamming his fist against the desk. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of rage and twisted satisfaction. Don't you dare pretend you're some innocent flower. Richard's blood is on your hands just as much as mine. Without me, you'd still be in his cage, taking his insults, living in his shadow. The words sliced through Clara's chest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The memory of Richard's cold corpse, the whispers at the funeral, the whispers in her own conscience. All of it came rushing back like a tide she had tried to outswim. You're wrong, Clara whispered, her voice trembling but laced with something steelier. You freed me from one prison, only to lock me in another. Antony laughed bitterly, stepping so close she could feel his breath. And yet, here you are, my wife, my prize, my partner in sin. She didn't flinch. Not this time. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the balance of power had already shifted. Earlier that week, Clara had sat across from Mrs. Whitmore Sr. in a candlelit parlor, the elder woman's gnarled hands trembling as she slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside had been the affidavit, the investigators' damning photographs, and most importantly, a deal. I will not see my son's death buried beneath your husband's greed, Mrs. Whitmore had hissed, her eyes aflame. But I will give you a chance to choose your own fate, Clara. Help me bring him down, and I'll shield you from the worst of it. And Clara, exhausted, desperate, but suddenly clear-headed, had agreed. She had signed her name, sealing the pact with the woman who once despised her. Now, standing in Antony's office, her heart still racing from his venom, Clara realized the truth. The trap he thought he had set for her had already begun closing around him. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his glare with calm defiance. "Careful, Antony," she said softly, almost sweetly, "because cages work both ways." For the first time, his smirk faltered, and Clara, though her hands still trembled, felt the faintest spark of power. The night glittered with champagne, sequins, and secrets. The Whitmore mansion pulsed with laughter, music, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Clara, draped in silver silk, moved through the crowd like a ghost disguised in glamour. Every smile she gave felt like it was borrowed, every laugh rehearsed. Tonight wasn't just another party. It was the stage for the final act. Antony was in his element, commanding the room like a king who believed himself untouchable. He flashed his charm at socialites, whispered sweet nothings into the ears of women he thought Clara didn't notice, and spoke loudly about the future investments he was going to make. Money that, unbeknownst to him, was already marked, tracked, and ready to seal his fate. Clara stood by the grand staircase, sipping from a glass of champagne she hadn't tasted. She kept her face steady, though her heart beat like a drum. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. How she would react, how she would look, how she would survive. Then came a sound. Heavy boots. The sharp crack of doors bursting open. The music stuttered, stopped, and in its place came a chorus of shouts. "Police! Everyone stay where you are." Gasps rippled through the guests. A woman dropped her glass, shards scattering across the marble floor. Men fumbled for their phones, others froze mid-toast. And at the center of it all, Antony's face drained of color before flushing a dangerous red. Handcuffs gleamed under the chandelier as officers surged toward him. "This is a mistake," Antony roared, fighting the grip of two men who pinned his arms. "You don't know who I am. You don't know who she is." He jerked his head toward Clara, his voice cracking with fury and betrayal. "She set me up. You hear me? She set me up." Dozens of eyes turned on Clara. For a split second, she felt naked, exposed. Then she remembered her script. The widow turned wife. The woman manipulated by a lover who twisted grief into desire. Her lip quivered, her hand clutched the railing for support, and tears slid down her cheek like pearls breaking free. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling loud enough for the nearest cameras. "I thought he loved me. I thought he—" Her voice broke, and the performance was flawless. The media was already feasting. Flashbulbs erupted like fireworks. Guests whispered, gasped, recorded every second. The headlines wrote themselves. The White Widow and the Black Lover, from affair to arrest. Antony thrashed against the officers, his voice hoarse now, desperate. "Clara, tell them the truth. Tell them what you did. You know, Saint. You're a murderer." His words split the room in half recoiling in shock, half leaning in for more. Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing into her palms. The image was perfect. A betrayed woman, broken and blinded by the man she thought would save her. The police dragged Antony out, his curses echoing down the marble hall. The moment the doors slammed shut behind him, the music, the chatter, the entire world of the party collapsed into a stunned silence. Clara stood alone at the center of it, the tragic heroine in a story she had authored herself. Days blurred into weeks. The trial consumed every headline, every talk show, every gossip column. Footage of Antony being hauled away played on repeat, while Clara's tear-streaked face became the picture of innocence. Public opinion tilted in her favor. The manipulator versus the manipulated. The predator versus the grieving widow. And when the dust settled, Clara was free. The estate was hers. The fortune was hers. Even the sympathy of the world was hers. On paper, she had won. But the nights told another story. In the stillness of the Whitmore mansion, with its gilded mirrors and endless hallways, Clara sat alone in the grand salon. The party glitter was gone, replaced with silence heavy enough to suffocate. She poured herself a drink, her hands shaking just enough to spill a few drops onto the mahogany table. Across the room, Richard's portrait loomed, his stern eyes painted in oil, his expression eternal. She stared back at him, the man she had buried, the man she thought she had escaped. And then it came. A whisper. Soft, mocking, familiar. You buried me for this. Clara froze. Her glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. The whisper lingered, curling through the room like smoke. Was it Richard's voice? Her conscience? Or had the mansion itself become a tomb of guilt? Clara's breath caught in her throat. For the first time since Richard's death, she realized the truth. Freedom was not in fortune, nor in love, nor in schemes. She hadn't escaped the cage. She had built a new one, brick by brick, lie by lie. She lowered her head, tears streaking down her face once more.